The SOS intended for help brought the deadliest fleet. Instead, there is a sound that every military officer in the known galaxy learns to fear before they learn their own call sign. It is not the sound of weapons charging. Not the static shriek of a proximity alarm or the low harmonic groan of a vessel breaking apart in vacuum. Those sounds are survivable. Those sounds have protocols. No. The sound I am describing is quieter. It is the sound of a distress beacon, the universal SOS pulse, 93 milliseconds of compressed signal, broadcast on every open frequency in the standard emergency band. It is the sound of something small and desperate reaching out into the dark and asking for help. We heard it. We came. That was our first mistake. I am Vetson, second signals officer aboard the INS Unyielding Patience, which is, and I say this with the professional resignation of someone who has served on her for 11 cycles, the least accurately named vessel in the entire interstellar navy. She is, in fact, a vessel of very little patience. Neither is her crew. We follow orders, file logs, drink the recycled nutrient slurry that our commissary officer insists on calling morning suspension, and we do not, as a rule, question where distress signals originate before we answer them. That rule, I have since concluded, was written by someone who had never met a human. What you are about to read is my personal log. Not an official report, those have been redacted, reclassified, and buried somewhere in the Navy's administrative digestive system where documentation goes to be quietly forgotten. This is the version I wrote for myself, at my own secondary console, on the 6 occasions between the initial intercept and the end of what Command is now carefully calling the Venori Corridor incident. I am writing it because I cannot stop thinking about what I saw. And I have found, in the cycles since, that the only way to stop a thing from eating at you from the inside is to take it out of your head and put it somewhere external where it can be examined properly. I am also writing it because nobody believes me. Not the part about the fleet, everyone believes that. The fleet was documented by 17 independent sensor arrays across 4 sectors. No, the part they don't believe is the small part. The human part. The part where I tell them what I watched one damaged, under-equipped, arguably irrational human soldier do with 9 hours, a broken communications relay, and what I can only describe as an absolutely unreasonable amount of personal stubbornness, while our fleet, the deadliest collection of warships to emerge from drydock in 40 cycles, sat in high orbit and argued about rules of engagement. Here is what the official record says: the Venori Corridor incident was resolved through coordinated fleet action following the neutralization of the primary K3 command node. Estimated enemy losses, substantial. Allied casualties, within acceptable parameters. Duration, 11 hours, 42 minutes. Classification, restricted. Asterisk. Here is what actually happened: a human sent an SOS. We came running. And then, we spent most of those 11 hours watching her work and trying to figure out what in the 7 cold hells she thought she was doing, and why, against every tactical model we had, it was working. This is that story. Read it. Or don't. File it under anomalous behavior, like my commanding officer did. But if you ever find yourself looking at a human, battered, undersupplied, grinning at something that is categorically not funny, and you think to yourself, surely they know they cannot win this, I need you to understand something before you finish that thought. They know. They just don't consider it relevant. Part 1, 93 milliseconds. The signal came in at 0314 ship time, which meant I was at my secondary console eating a protein brick that tasted approximately like recycled insulation padding and watching the long-range sensor sweep cycle through its 6th uneventful rotation of the night shift. I want to be clear about this detail, because it matters. I almost didn't flag it. 93 milliseconds. A single compressed pulse on the universal emergency frequency, standard SOS encoding, faint enough that it registered in the lower third of my detection threshold. The kind of signal that bounces off debris fields, gets generated by failing navigational buoys, occasionally burps out of decommissioned survey probes drifting through unclaimed space like bad memories. My console flagged it with a priority 3 marker, yellow, not red, and waited for me to decide what to do with it. I finished the protein brick first. I am not proud of this. Then, I pulled the signal and looked at it properly. The encoding was unusual. Not wrong, the SOS structure was standard compliant, every compression ratio within normal tolerance, but layered. Beneath the universal distress header there was a secondary data packet, tight and dense, compressed into the trailing edge of the signal where most automated systems would never think to look. Whoever sent this had deliberately hidden it there. Had wanted the beacon to read as generic distress to anything doing a casual sweep, while the real message waited for someone paying closer attention. I was, as previously noted, on my 6th uneventful rotation of a night shift. I was paying very close attention to anything that was not my console's gentle hum and the protein brick. I unpacked the secondary packet. Coordinates. A specific location in the Venori corridor, a stretch of navigable space that was, on paper, neutral territory, and, in practice, had been quietly occupied by K3 forward elements for the better part of 3 cycles. Alongside the coordinates, a timestamp, a military designation I didn't recognize at first glance, and a 14-character alphanumeric code that my console flagged yellow, then orange, then, after a 3-second verification pause that felt significantly longer, red. Allied identification. Human military. Special operations classification. I stared at my console for a moment. Then, I pressed my secondary log activation and said, very quietly, into the recorder, "This is going to be a long shift." I was understating things considerably. Commander Hatefron arrived on the bridge 40 minutes later, which, given that I had sent the priority alert directly to his personal quarters and included the words K3 held space and human special operations in the subject line, suggested either that he had taken time to review the full data before coming or that he was a very thorough individual when it came to uniform preparation. Possibly both. His collar was immaculate. "Walk me through it," he said, without sitting down. I walked him through it. The signal, the hidden packet, the coordinates, the identification code. He listened without interrupting, which was something he did when he was not yet sure how annoyed to be. His secondary fringe, the 3 sensory tendrils that ran along the upper ridge of his cranium, were held perfectly flat, which in our species indicates either intense focus or the particular kind of controlled calm that precedes someone throwing a tactical display across the room. "Human special operations," he repeated, when I finished. "Yes, sir." "In the Venori corridor." "Yes, sir." "Which is currently occupied by an estimated 47 K3 vessels, including 2 Dreadnought-class 49 as of last survey sweep, sir. The additional 2 are escort carriers. They arrived 6 cycles ago." A pause. His fringe shifted fractionally. "Why," he said, with the tone of a man who had stopped expecting good answers to his questions some years ago, "is a human special operations unit in the Venori corridor?" "I don't know, sir." "And they sent a distress signal." "A distress signal with a hidden secondary packet containing their exact position, military ID, and what I believe to be an encrypted tactical summary, sir." "The encryption key matches the Allied forces protocol updated, I checked 11 days ago." "They updated it 11 days ago and a human unit has already managed to require rescue." "It appears that way, sir." He looked at the display for a long time. I watched his fringe. It did not move. This was, I had learned in 8 cycles under his command, the most concerning possible outcome. "Get me Admiral Sorath VE, he said. "And, Vethsan, sir?" "Make more of that terrible suspension drink. This is going to take a while." He was also understating things. It seemed to be contagious. The encrypted tactical summary took our decryption team 22 minutes to unpack. I spent those 22 minutes listening to Commander Hatefron explain to Admiral Sorath VE, via secure channel, what we had found and why it was probably not something we could ignore, while the Admiral made a series of sounds that suggested he found the situation deeply inconvenient. I sympathize, in retrospect. Being Admiral of the Allied Forward Fleet in this sector is a role that comes with considerable prestige and a tactical doctrine that was not, strictly speaking, designed to account for humans doing things like this. What the decrypted summary told us, assembled from what I can only imagine had been a deeply unpleasant series of hours for whoever wrote it, approximately 9 cycles ago, a 2-person human special operations unit had been inserted into the Venori corridor under a joint intelligence directive. Their mission: confirm the presence and operational readiness of a K3 command relay station buried in the debris field at grid reference 7 Epsilon, which Allied Command had been arguing about the existence of for the better part of a cycle. Confirm. Document. Extract without contact. Without contact was apparently the part that had not gone according to plan. The summary, written in the clipped, notation-heavy style that human military reports favor, all subject-verb-subject with the emotions leached out and filed somewhere separate, described how, at some point in the 48 hours following insertion, one member of the unit had been killed. Hostile contact. The surviving operative had described the contact as brief and expensive on both sides, which I had to read 3 times before I was satisfied I understood the implied scope of what that meant in practice. The surviving operative's name was Sergeant Adiz Ehejurika. I wrote it in my personal log at 0511, 11 minutes before the summary finished decrypting, because the identification package had come through first and I had nothing else to write. She was alive. Or had been, at the time the beacon was sent. She was in a damaged insertion craft, hiding inside the debris field at 7 Epsilon. She had confirmed the command relay station's existence. She had also, according to the final notation in the tactical summary, and I want to be precise here, because this is the part that made Commander Hateron's fringe go completely, unnervingly still for the first time that morning, she had also left a message. Not part of the official summary. A personal addendum, appended to the end of the packet. It said, asterisk if this reaches Allied Command, station is real, active, and critical to K3 corridor operations. I have enough documentation to give your intelligence division a very good week. I also have 49 warships surrounding my current position and approximately 9 hours of power remaining in my insertion craft's concealment system. I would appreciate a response at your earliest convenience. No pressure. Ehejurika, Sergeant, Human Allied Forces, currently living inside a piece of a dead freighter and eating a nutrition bar that expired 8 months ago, asterisk Hatefron Reddit. I watched his fringe. It was still flat. Then, very quietly, he said, she's been there 3 days. 4, sir. The timestamp on the original insertion is 4 days, he corrected himself. She has been inside a debris field, surrounded by 49 enemy warships, for 4 days, and she chose this moment to make contact because she has 9 hours of concealment left. That appears to be accurate, sir. And she sent it with a note. With a note, sir. He looked at the display. I looked at the recycled nutrient suspension I had poured into 2 cups, one for him, one for myself, and which was sitting on the edge of the tactical console getting progressively more lukewarm. Get Admiral Sorath VE back on the channel, he said. And, Vetson already opening the channel, sir. Tell me you have some kind of read on why the human is still alive after 4 days in that debris field. I have some preliminary thoughts, sir. I look forward to them, he said, in the tone of a man who did not look forward to them at all. Here is what I knew about the Venori debris field at 7 Epsilon, compiled from survey records and the tactical summary. The field was the remnant of a supply convoy that the K3 had destroyed at the start of their corridor push 3 cycles ago. 18 vessels, most of them civilian transport class, gutted and scattered across approximately 11,000 kilometers of navigable space. The K3 had since built their relay station in the densest part of the field, using the debris as a kind of natural sensor barrier, hard to scan through, difficult for smaller ships to navigate, effectively invisible to long-range observation because the metal mass of the wrecks interfered with most standard detection arrays. Which was, I reasoned, why the insertion unit had been sent there in the first place. If you want to get close to something the K3 have deliberately hidden inside a mess of sensor scrambling wreckage, you need a very small ship and very patient people inside it. What I had not considered, and what Ehejurika's survival strongly implied, was that the same properties that made the debris field useful for hiding a relay station also made it exceptional for hiding a single insertion craft. The K3, after the hostile contact that had killed the other operative, had clearly searched the debris field. Ehejurika's summary noted contact attempts, active scan sweeps, 2 separate boarding sweeps of large wreck structures in the area. All of it documented in the same notation stripped shorthand as the rest of the report. Day 1 post-contact, 3 sweep vessels, active scan, depth penetrating. Remained stationary. Not found * Day 2 post-contact, boarding team in Wreck Cluster C7. Stayed in Wreck Cluster C9. Not found * Day 3 post-contact, nothing. Either satisfied or setting a trap. Proceeded under assumption of trap * Day 4 post-contact, power at 9 hours. Documentation complete. Sending now * She had spent 4 days lying still inside a piece of dead freighter while the Kothri looked for her, completing her mission documentation, and waiting for the right moment to send the beacon. She had not fled when she had the chance, because her mission was not complete. She had not signaled earlier, because the signal might have given away her position before the documentation was finished. She had a dead partner, 9 hours of power, 49 warships, and she had spent the downtime writing a note. I told Commander HFY my preliminary thoughts. He drank his nutrient suspension without comment. I had the sense that words were, at that moment, insufficient to the situation. Admiral Sorath's first response to the briefing was, "What is the tactical value of extracting one human operative?" His second response, after HFY outlined the intelligence Hejurika had gathered documentation on the relay station's architecture, its communication protocols, its uplink schedule, and what the summary had described only as additional material of probable strategic significance, was a longer silence. His third response was, "How long to assemble a retrieval unit?" His fourth response, after tactical operations estimated a minimum 14-hour assembly timeline for a force capable of penetrating Kothri-held space at 7 Epsilon, was a sound that I had only heard the Admiral make twice before in my career. It was a sound that meant he was doing mathematics in his head that he did not like the outcome of. 9 hours of concealment power. 14 hours to assemble a retrieval force. The math was not cooperative. What do we have that can move in 6 hours? HFY asked. The unyielding patience, tactical operations said. There was a pause. Just us? HFY said. Everything else in range is either committed to the Theta perimeter or in scheduled maintenance, tactical said. The Patience and 2 escort frigates, if the frigates pull from the Theta picket line. The picket line, the Admiral said, cannot be depleted. Then, just the Patience, another pause. Longer. I looked at my display. 1 vessel. 1 cruiser, middleweight, not a warship by the primary definition, we were signals and intelligence, not combat engagement. Against 49 Kothri vessels, including 2 dreadnoughts. So we go in with 1 ship, HFY said. He said it the way a person states a fact they have accepted but do not endorse. And we have 6 hours to figure out how, he added. He looked at me. His fringe, for the first time that shift, moved. A single fractional adjustment forward, then back, that in our species indicates the end of a decision cycle. He had decided. Wake every station, he said. Full operational status. And, someone, he looked at the display, at the coordinates, at the single pulsing marker in the middle of 49 enemy signals, send Sergeant Hejurika an acknowledgement. On the hidden channel. Tell her we received her note. What do we say, sir? The communications officer asked. HFY looked at the display for a moment. Tell her, message received. Sit tight. And, a pause, brief, tell her the nutrition bar is probably fine. I filed the acknowledgement. I made a note in my personal log. Outside, the stars were indifferent and, the void between us and, the debris field at 7 Epsilon was approximately 6 hours of hard burn and, whatever portion of a career I had left if this did not go well. I poured a second cup of nutrient suspension and, began the situational analysis. 6 hours. I want to describe what 6 hours of preparation looks like on an Allied naval vessel that was not designed for solo incursion operations, because the official record compresses this into half a sentence and, the half sentence does not convey the specific quality of controlled disorder that settled over the unyielding patience like a second atmosphere for the duration of that morning. Every station running. Every display lit. Tactical running probability models that produced numbers. I made a personal decision to stop reading after the third iteration, because the numbers were not motivating. Intelligence working through a Hejurika's documentation on the relay station, cross-referencing architecture specifications, pulling historical comparables, building a picture of what we were looking at and, what, theoretically, could be done about it. Engineering reviewing the patient's sensor suite for any configuration that might improve our odds of getting in and out of a debris field without being detected and destroyed. The 2 escort frigates, Admiral Sorath VE had confirmed, could not be released from the Theta picket. We were alone. I ran signals analysis. My station, my function, I tracked the K3 signal environment in and around 7 Epsilon, mapping the communication traffic between the 49 vessels, between the vessels and the relay station, looking for patterns, gaps, anything that might be useful. K3 communication protocol is well documented. They are methodical, structured, regular in their operational rhythms in ways that their military doctrine considers efficient and that Allied intelligence has, historically, found exploitable. There was a rotation gap. Every 4 hours, the relay station's primary uplink cycled to a secondary backup protocol while the primary refreshed. During that window 11 minutes, based on the pattern I was seeing, the station's active scan output dropped to approximately 40% of baseline. 11 minutes. I flagged it for Hatefron. He looked at it for a long time. We can't extract her in 11 minutes, he said. No, sir. But we could get in, he said. Into the debris field. Into sensor shadow. If we timed the approach to hit that gap, we would need to be moving at the outer edge of debris range at the precise start of the window. And we would need a Hedgerika's craft to move toward us rather than the other way. Her insertion craft's signature is smaller than ours. She moves toward the field edge, we come in during the gap, she boards. Total exposure at reduced scan output, under 8 minutes if everything is timed correctly. And, if everything is not timed correctly? I did not answer that. The probability models were still visible on my secondary display. I minimized the window. There's something else, I said. The secondary data packet Hedgerika sent the section marked additional material of probable strategic significance. Intelligence finished decrypting it 20 minutes ago. And it's not just documentation on the relay station, sir. It's the station's active uplink log. Communications archive. K3 traffic routing through this sector for the past 9 cycles. The fringe went still again. She pulled their communications archive, he said. From inside the debris field. During 3 days of active search sweeps. How? The notation just says, I check my display, standard access exploit, older system, not well patched. A long silence. Standard, he repeated. That's what she wrote, sir. He looked at the tactical display. At the 49 signals. At the 11-minute window. At the 6 hours we had to make this work and the 9 hours of power Hedgerika had left when the beacon sent, which meant she now had approximately 3 hours remaining. Get me a line to her, he said. Directly. I want to coordinate the approach. She'll hear you on the secondary channel, sir. She has a receiver in the insertion craft. Good. He straightened. Fringe forward, full operational attention, the way he held himself before every critical engagement I had served with him through. Then, let's go over the plan with her. He paused. She did write that note, he said, almost to himself. For days in a dead freighter, 49 warships, and she wrote a note about the nutrition bar. Yes, sir. What kind of species? He started. He stopped. Looked at the display again. I waited. Never mind, he said. Open the channel. I opened the channel. The debris field at 7 Epsilon was 3 hours of hard burn away. We had an 11-minute window, 1 ship, and a human soldier who had spent 4 days playing dead inside a graveyard of civilian transports and had come out of it with the K3's entire communications archive and a sense of humor about expired nutrition bars. I made another entry in my personal log, brief, she's still there. We're on our way. I have stopped reading the probability models, then, I began the burn calculations. The stars did not care. The void did not hurry. The unyielding patience turned, and burned, and moved toward a place it had no business being, at a speed that it was not rated for, toward a woman sitting in the dark who had already, by any rational measure, done the impossible twice and was apparently prepared to do it again. I did not understand, at that point, what I was going to witness in the hours that followed. I understood only that we were going, and that whatever happened next, I was going to write it down. The nutrition bar comment was still in the log. I read it 3 more times on the burnout. I kept trying to find the part where it didn't make sense. I never found it. Part 2, the window ahead. Eureka's voice, when it came through the channel for the first time, was not what I expected. I do not know exactly what I expected. The tactical summary she had written was stripped of everything except information, facts, observations, dates, notations, and I had constructed, unconsciously, some image of the person who had written it. I had imagined someone with a voice to match. Controlled. Precise. Possibly quiet. She was not quiet. Patience, this is Eureka. You actually came. I want you to know, professionally speaking, that this is not something I took for granted. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been alone and silent for a long time and found the sudden availability of conversation almost physically relieving. There was something else underneath it, a careful flatness in the vowels, a pace slightly too even that I catalogued without quite knowing how to classify it. Not calm. Not the opposite of calm. Something that was holding itself very deliberately in the space between the two. Sergeant, Commander HFY said, we're on approach. 2 hours 40 minutes to debris field edge. I need your status. Power at 2 hours, 6 minutes as of right now. Running minimal systems. Life support, receiver, the concealment emitter. The emitter's the expensive one. A pause. I've also got documentation package alpha through Delta fully encrypted and ready to transmit on your mark. The uplink archive is in package Delta. Your intelligence division is going to have a very productive week. Acknowledged. We'll pull the packages once you're aboard. About that. A fractional shift in her voice, not a change, exactly, more like a careful adjustment, the way a person moves their weight before they say something they have been rehearsing. The 11-minute window in your approach plan, you reviewed it? Your signals officer transmitted it 20 minutes ago. I've been sitting here thinking about it. I had, in fact, sent her the approach outline the moment HFY approved it. Standard coordination protocol. She had clearly been doing more than receiving. The window works, she said, if nothing changes. But I've been watching the K3 traffic pattern for 4 days, and there's something your approach model doesn't account for. HFY looked at me. His fringe shifted, the question was implicit. I pulled up the traffic analysis on my secondary display and cross-referenced it against the pattern Eureka was about to describe, because I had the strong instinct that I should be doing that in real time. Tell me, HFY said. Every cycle, 40 to 60 minutes before the uplink rotation gap, there's an increase in patrol density around the debris field perimeter. Not a sweep, just tightening. 2 or 3 additional vessels moving into the outer ring. Your signals officer probably saw it in the data but may not have weighted it as a patrol pattern because it doesn't correlate with the station's schedule. It correlates with a different cycle. The escort carrier rotation. I pulled the escort carrier positions and overlaid the patrol density data. She was right. The correlation was not immediately obvious. The escort carrier rotation ran on a longer cycle than the station's uplink schedule, and they only coincided in a roughly 90-minute window every 16 hours. I had not weighted the patrol density shift as significant because my model had been built around the station schedule. I had missed it. I flagged this in my personal log with the notation, she has been watching their traffic pattern for 4 days from inside a piece of dead freighter. This felt important to document. The window still opens, Eureka continued. But, when it does, there will be 3 to 5 additional patrol vessels in positions that your current approach vector runs directly through. You'll be in the gap, but not in the shadow. They'll see you the moment you cross into debris range. A silence. Alternate approach vector? HFY asked. There is one. It adds 11 minutes to your transit time and requires coming in from the spinward edge, which has a debris cluster that your ship's navigation is going to find annoying. But, the patrol pattern has a consistent gap on that vector during the window. I've been watching it every cycle for 4 days. It's reliable. She gave us the coordinates. I ran the navigation calculation. The debris cluster she described was dense, threading it would require precise maneuvering at approach speed, and precise maneuvering at approach speed was not, as a general statement, what a midweight cruiser was designed to provide. Vetsan, HFY said, "Can we thread it?" I looked at the navigation display. I thought about what I was going to say before I said it. Engineering will need to modify the approach algorithm. It's possible, but it requires a human-assisted navigation correction at 3 points in the debris cluster. Automated systems won't handle the gap widths. We'll need a piloted manual override. Get me Ensign Tavriel, HFY said. He's the best manual navigator on the ship. Tavriel, whom I had the professional pleasure of knowing primarily through his complaints about the manual override interface, was contacted, briefed, and dispatched to the navigation console with 47 minutes to recalibrate before we needed the approach algorithm finalized. He complained about the manual override interface. I noted this in my log and returned to the channel. Ehejurika, I said, which was the first time I had spoken directly to her and which I immediately felt was probably irregular but which the commander did not correct. How did you identify the spinward vector gap? Counted patrol transits, she said. Every time a K3 vessel crossed within sensor range of my position, I logged the vector, speed, and interval. Built the pattern from that. Takes a while, but it's straightforward if you have nothing else to do. You built a full patrol model. It's not that complicated if you're patient. Or, I guess, if you're the unyielding patience, a pause. That's a very long name for a ship. It was named by committee, I said, without thinking about it. That explains a lot, she said, and I had the strange and slightly disorienting experience of a person I had never met making me want to respond to something that was not tactically relevant. I did not respond. I returned to my calculations. But, I wrote it in the log. 1 hour 40 minutes to debris range. The revised approach vector was finalized. Tavriel had his corrections loaded and had stopped complaining about the manual override interface, which I took as a sign that he had either accepted the situation or was saving the complaints for afterward. Engineering confirmed the Patience's drive output could sustain the approach speed required. Tactical had run the new probability models. I did not read the new probability models. What I did read was the final section of Ehejurika's intelligence package, which Intelligence Division had finished processing and which Commander HFY had authorized me to review as part of signal support analysis. The relay station at 7 Epsilon was not just a communications hub. The uplink archive Ehejurika had pulled confirmed what Allied Command had suspected but been unable to prove. The station was the routing node for all K3 coordination across not just the Venori corridor but the 3 adjacent sectors. Every fleet movement, every resupply schedule, every strategic communication in this region of contested space touched that station. It was the connective tissue of their entire forward operational structure. Destroy it, and the K3 coordination advantage in this sector collapsed. Every fleet element operating here would be blind and isolated. The Allied advance, stalled for 2 cycles behind the corridor blockade, would have a window to move. I looked at the station's position in the debris field. At the 49 warships surrounding it. Then, I looked at the communications archive Ehejurika had pulled, already generating tactical summaries that our intelligence division was going to spend the next week processing. She had gotten us the key to the entire K3 corridor strategy. For days, 1 person, 49 warships, and the key. I made an entry in my personal log. I did not write anything analytical. I just wrote, package Delta, then I closed the log and went back to the approach calculations, because there was still the small matter of retrieving her before her power ran out and the concealment emitter shut down and 49 K3 warships found the person who had just stolen their communications archive. 1 hour to debris range. I should describe the debris field as it appeared on our long-range sensors, because it is relevant to understanding what happened next and because my sensory impressions at that hour were vivid in a way that I have not managed to forget. 18 dead vessels. Civilian transports, mostly freighters, a colony tender, 2 passenger liners. The K3 had killed them 3 cycles ago in a route interdiction, and they had been sitting here in the corridor's traffic lane ever since, slowly disintegrating, their mass distributed across 11,000 kilometers of navigable space in a pattern that looked, on the sensor display, something like the aftermath of a cellular rupture, a burst and, scatter, a wound that had gone cold. The relay station sat at the center of it, its signal signature half buried in the sensor interference from the surrounding wreckage. You could see it if you knew what to look for. If you did not know what to look for, you saw a debris field. An obstacle. A graveyard to route around. HFY had gone in there on purpose. I spent a moment thinking about this, what it requires of a person, to take a small ship into a space like that, surrounded by the dead vessels of a civilian convoy, and set up house in the ruins of something destroyed before you arrived and wait in the dark while people who want to kill you sweep through the surrounding corridors looking for you, and write notes in your mission log about expired nutrition bars. I spent a moment thinking about it and then put it somewhere in my mind labeled process later and returned to the channel. HFY. Status. 47 minutes on the emitter. Her voice still had that careful evenness. What's your ETA to debris edge? 52 minutes to the spinward approach point. A pause. 5 seconds, approximately. That's tight, she said. Yes. You'll be in the approach when my emitter shuts down. Yes. Another pause. Shorter. Okay. I need to give you a contingency. She said it with the tone of someone who had been thinking about this contingency for a while and had been hoping not to need it. If the emitter dies before you reach me, there's a window in the patrol pattern. She gave me a time interval, a vector, a brief and technically precise description of a gap in the K3 patrol coverage that would exist for approximately 4 minutes when 2 of the outer ring patrol vessels crossed vectors near debris cluster C7. If I'm exposed before you reach me, I move. I take the insertion craft to cluster C9 and I go inert. No power, no signal. The K3 will detect the emitter going down, but if I'm already moving to a new position, they'll search C7, I said. And I won't be there. 4 days ago they searched C7. They didn't search C9 because I was in C9 and I had the emitter running. If the situation reverses, if I can get to C9 without being intercepted during that 4-minute gap, you'll be hiding in a location they've already cleared, I said. They tend not to check places twice. She had, apparently, been thinking about this for a while. The contingency adds time, she said. Maybe 40 minutes to reach C9 and go inert. But it keeps me viable for pickup if your approach needs to be adjusted. And if you don't make the 4-minute gap? Hadron said. He had been listening silently for the past several minutes. A beat. Then, it gets more interesting, she said. I noted that she did not define more interesting. I noted that I did not ask her to. 31 minutes to the spinward approach point. The emitter had 31 minutes of power. We had 31 minutes of buffer if nothing changed. Nothing, as a category, is reliable in the Venori corridor. At 31 minutes, a K3 patrol vessel on the inner ring made an unscheduled course correction. Not dramatic, a minor heading adjustment, perhaps in response to a navigational obstacle in the debris field, perhaps a sensor glitch, perhaps a crew decision of no strategic significance. 3 degrees port. 3 degrees put it on an intercept with our planned approach vector. Not an alert. Not a contact. Just a patrol vessel drifting 3 degrees off its established heading for reasons that probably had nothing to do with us. Tavriel recalculated. The new approach required a 15-second burn delay. 15 seconds. The emitter had 31 minutes of power. A 15-second burn delay added 15 seconds to our arrival time. The emitter had 30 minutes and 45 seconds of power. These calculations are not complicated. They are, however, the kind that make your secondary sensory organs do things they are not supposed to do in professional settings. My chemical processing glands, the pair in my lower facial region that produce contextual sense signals in our species, emitted something that my console noted, with the dead accuracy of automated systems, as stress-related compound, elevated production, non-emergency threshold. I noted the alert. I minimized the window. HFY, I said. I see it, she said. I'm watching their transponder signals from here. The patrol drift. Your emitter, I know. That careful evenness had thinned slightly. Not gone. But the surface of it was visible now, the effort under it. I've been running the numbers since it started moving. If the drift stabilizes and you maintain approach, it's close. It's very close. A pause. How good is Tavriel? I looked at Tavriel, who was at the manual navigation console with all four of his manipulator limbs moving in the rapid, coordinated pattern that our species produces under conditions of intensive focus, occasionally punctuated by a sound that I can only describe as a sustained low-tonal complaint directed at the interface. He is the best manual navigator on this ship, I said. Okay. A breath. Not a word, just a breath, the sound of a biological organism managing something. Okay. Then, we hold the plan. I'll watch the patrol. If the drift continues past 8 degrees, I activate the contingency and move to C9. If it stabilizes before 8 degrees, we hold the approach, HFY said. We hold the approach, she agreed. We held the approach. The patrol drift stabilized at 5.3 degrees. At 22 minutes remaining on the emitter, 7 minutes before our debris edge approach, it corrected back toward its original heading, as if nothing had happened, as if it had simply changed its mind. I do not ascribe intentions to navigational adjustments. But, I wrote 5.3 degrees in my personal log 3 times in a row, which is not something I normally do. The approach window opened. The relay station's uplink cycled to backup protocol. The active scan output across the debris field dropped to 40% of baseline. Tavriel, HFY said. Manual corrections loaded, Tavriel said, and his voice had the quality of his full attention in a way I rarely heard from him except during very hard simulations or when someone tried to modify his interface settings without asking. Debris cluster transit on your mark. Mark. The unyielding patients entered the debris field at the spin ward approach point, threading through the gap HFY had identified from 4 days of observation and Tavriel's 3 correction points, and the world outside the hull became dense and strange, the sensor display filling with the mass signatures of 18 dead civilian vessels, the signal environment fragmenting into static and scatter, the stars disappearing behind the wreckage of a convoy that had been destroyed 3 cycles ago for the strategic value of the corridor it was crossing. I watched the display. I watched the patrol pattern. I watched the emitter countdown. HFY had set her receiver to transmit a live power readout once we entered the field. 19 minutes. 14. 9. HFY, I said. We're at inner approach. C9 is 2 minutes ahead. I see you on passive sensors, she said. Her voice had something different in it now. Something I did not have a word for in my language. A release of pressure, not relief, not quite. Something that had been held under tension for a very long time and was now, incrementally, being permitted to ease. You're in the gap. The patrol pattern is clean. You're clear. Moving to C9 now, HFY said. 8 minutes on the emitter. The patients moved through the debris field, and I watched the dead freighters slide past on the sensor display, and I thought about what HFY had done here, had chosen this graveyard, had moved through it and into it and lived inside one of these dead hulks for 4 days and 4 nights, and she had documented and catalogued and waited and not fled and not panicked and had, when she finally reached out, done it with coordinates and an encrypted tactical package and a note. About nutrition bars. 6 minutes. The signal from cluster C9 resolved on my display. The insertion craft, tiny, scarred, dark except for the concealment emitter still running on its last reserves. I have you on sensors, I said. I have you on visual, she said. You're big. Midweight cruiser, I said. I noticed. A beat. Do you have a docking bay or are we doing this with tethers? Bay 6. I'm opening it now. Okay. Her voice had settled. The careful evenness was gone, and what remained underneath it was something quieter and more real tiredness I would recognize later, and something else that I kept returning to in the cycles afterward. Not relief. Something that encompassed relief but was larger than it. The specific quality of having finished a thing that needed to be finished. Guide me in. My maneuverability is minimal at this power level. We'll bring you the rest of the way. Appreciated. A pause. Ehejurika to patience. I have packages Alpha through Delta ready to transmit. The uplink archive is ready. Whatever you need. We'll debrief fully once you're aboard, HFY said. Right. Obviously. Another pause, shorter, different in quality. Thank you, she said. Not to the commander specifically. Not to any one person. Just into the channel, toward the ship. For coming. HFY did not respond immediately. I watched his fringe. It was held forward, not the decision posture, not the operational attention posture. Something else. Something without a formal classification in the posture catalog we learn in academy training. You sent a distress signal, he said. We answered it. Most distress signals from this sector get a fleet inquiry first, she said. Takes about a week. You had 9 hours. I had 9 hours, she agreed. We were available, HFY said, and his voice had something in it that the fringe catalogs do not cover either. I guided her in. Bay 6 sealed. The Patience reversed course, threading back through the spinward gap, and, behind us the relay station's uplink returned to primary protocol and, the Kothri patrol pattern continued its established cycle, unaware, for the moment, that the person they had been searching for was no longer in the debris field. The emitter went dark at 1 minute and 40 seconds of remaining power. I wrote this in the log. Then, I wrote the time, the position, the power reading. Then, I sat at my console for a moment, in the recycled air and the engine hum, and I looked at the sensor display, at the 49 warships that were still out there, and at the relay station signal sitting in the center of the debris field, and at the communications archive now sitting in our intelligence division's queue. The key to the entire Kothri corridor strategy. One person. 4 days. 49 warships. I poured a fresh cup of nutrient suspension. It was approximately as bad as all the previous cups. I drank it, because it was there, and because the next several hours were going to require a great deal of planning, and because the story was not, I was beginning to understand, finished yet. Not even close. Part 3, what the signal was for Bay 6 smelled like a human had been living in it. I note this because it was the first thing I registered when the internal sensors reported Bay 6 sealed, atmosphere equalized, airlock cycling, a shift in the Patience's internal chemical environment so foreign that my olfactory processing array flagged it as an unknown compound, then, as a mixed compound event, then, as biological origin, mammalian, warm-blooded, class 12 world consistent, presence confirmed. In practical terms, the Bay smelled like someone who had been in an insertion craft for 4 days. Perspiration, the breakdown products of whatever nutrition bars she had been eating, the faint metallic edge of recycled oxygen running on minimal filtration. An organic, dense, animal smell that my species produces nothing comparable to, and that fills a sterile corridor like weather fills a valley, present everywhere immediately, source unmistakable. I heard the bay door open on the internal audio feed. I heard her walk the corridor. She came onto the bridge without waiting for an escort, which meant either the bay crew had not thought to send one or she had not waited for them to. She was shorter than I had constructed from voice and tactical summary. There is a way that a person can be physically present that adjusts every previous assumption about them, and this was one of those moments. She was compact and solid in the way that suggests a body accustomed to carrying its own weight without complaint. The EVA suit had been opened from the collar down. She had a navigation pack slung over one shoulder and the documentation storage unit in her hand, and she was eating something, another nutrition bar, the wrapper half crumpled in her grip, with the steady, automatic pace of someone who has learned to eat when the opportunity presents itself regardless of circumstances. She looked at the tactical display. At the 49 signals. At the relay station marker. She looked at Commander HFY. Vetson, he said, and I understood he was introducing me. She looked at me. Her eyes were a warm brown, dark, adapted from days with minimal light, slightly bloodshot. She had a bruise along her jaw and a sealed cut above one eyebrow that the insertion craft's medical kit had closed but not removed. She looked like 4 days in a dead freighter, which is to say she looked like someone who had finished something difficult and had not yet had the chance to not look like that. "You're the signals officer," she said. "You caught the secondary packet." "Yes." "Good catch." She went back to looking at the tactical display. She finished the nutrition bar, folded the wrapper with a habitual neatness that I noticed because of its incongruity, and tucked it into a pocket of the EVA suit. "We have a problem," she said, in the same tone that the tactical summary had used for phrases like hostile contact and brief and expensive. The problem was this: the communications archive, package Delta, HFY's 4 days of work, was time-sensitive. The archive contained the routing structure for all Cothri coordination in this region, including scheduled fleet movements and resupply chains, and it was accurate as of the timestamp of her last data pull, 18 hours ago. Intelligence had spent the transit processing it and had already identified 6 scheduled fleet movements in the next 36 hours, 3 of which were in sectors where Allied forces had been blind for cycles. The window for acting on this intelligence was narrow. 36 hours at maximum, after which the highest value elements of the archive would be superseded by new Cothri scheduling. But, acting on the intelligence, transmitting the extracted data to Allied command, initiating fleet movements, beginning the strategic operations that the archive made possible, would do something else. Something that our intelligence division had flagged within 20 minutes of processing the archive and which had been waiting in HFY's queue since before we brought her aboard. The moment Allied command moved on the archive's intelligence, the Cothri would know the archive had been pulled. No one changes fleet movements 6 ways simultaneously without a reason. They would trace it back. They would audit the relay station. They would find the access exploit. They would know where the breach had originated. The 49 warships in the Venori corridor were going to spend the next 36 hours looking for us. Not abstractly. Not as a general security response. Looking for the specific vessel that had entered the debris field during the uplink window and extracted their signal intelligence and left. One ship that had entered the field from the spinward edge, navigated the debris cluster, and gone home with the key to their entire regional strategy in its intelligence bay. They would know it had been a small, fast incursion. They would be looking for exactly the profile the unyielding patience matched. "How long before they connect the extraction to us?" HFY asked. "Their security review cycle is 9 hours, HFY said. She said it the way someone says a thing they have been thinking about for a while. They'll audit the station access logs first. That'll take most of the 9 hours. After that, a pause, they'll look at patrol records. Sensor logs. Anything that correlates with the access timestamp. The spinward approach. The spinward approach, she confirmed. I did my best to stay in sensor shadow, but your ship is not small." She looked at the tactical display. At the signal map. Once they correlate the patrol sensor data with the station access, they'll have a vector and a timeline. They'll put out an intercept. Another pause. That's probably 7 to 10 hours from now. "We can be out of the corridor in 6, HFY said. "Yes." She looked at the display for a moment longer. "Or." Commander HFY's fringe shifted. Or, she said, "you transmit the archive to Allied command right now, while we're still in sensor range of the station. And Allied command moves on it in the next 4 hours. Before the Cothri complete their security review. We would be transmitting from inside the corridor. You'd be transmitting from inside a Cothri-controlled sector with 49 warships in sensor range," she said. "I know what that means. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm telling you it's the option that uses the archive at maximum value, before the window closes." HFY looked at the tactical display. At the 49 signals. At the relay station. I looked at HFY. She was looking at the display with an expression that I could not, at that moment, read. The bruise on her jaw. The cut above her eyebrow. The empty wrapper folded neatly in her pocket. She had the quality of a person who has already thought through the full scope of something and has arrived at the part where they wait for everyone else to catch up. You calculated this before you sent the beacon, HFY said. Not an accusation. A recognition. A pause. I knew what the archive was worth, she said. I knew what acting on it would require. I wrote the note instead of a full tactical proposal because I didn't know who would pick up the signal and I didn't want to overcomplicate the ask. She looked at him. I also genuinely wanted rescue. Those are not mutually exclusive. The note about the nutrition bar. Something moved briefly across her face, not quite a smile but the structural precursor to one. The bar was genuinely terrible. That part wasn't tactical. I want to describe the next 40 minutes accurately, because the official record does not. What the official record says is, Commander HFY, in consultation with Tactical and Intelligence Division, authorized an emergency transmission of package Delta to Allied Command via encrypted burst signal at 1347 ship time, while the INS unyielding patients remained within the Venori corridor sensor environment. What happened in those 40 minutes? HFY opened a channel to Admiral Sareth VE. He laid out the situation, the archive, the window, the option, the risk. He was precise and complete and he made no recommendation, which was itself a recommendation. The Admiral asked how long the patients could sustain in the corridor if Kothari forces moved to intercept after the transmission. HFY asked Hejerica. She was standing at a secondary display, pulling up the patrol pattern she had been observing for 4 days, and she had been building something on the display while we talked, a model, a movement analysis, the kind of spatial temporal pattern map that our tactical division produces with 6 officers and a dedicated processing array, assembled by one person in 40 minutes from memory. If you transmit at 1347, she said, without looking up from the display, the security review triggers in 9 hours. Call it 2247. They'll have a vector by 0147. Their intercept assets will be in position, here, she marked the display, by 0347. That's your hard deadline. If Allied Command moves on the archive at 1347 and initiates operations before 0100, the Kothari Corridor Command loses communication coherence before the intercept is in place. They'll be chasing us, HFY said. They'll be chasing us, she confirmed. But, if the corridor operation has already started by then, they have bigger problems than one signals cruiser. And, if Allied Command doesn't move fast enough. She paused. A real pause, not a calculated one. Then, we have a problem. How do you assess that risk? She considered this for a moment. Allied Command has the archive. They'll see the same scheduling windows I saw. They'll understand the value. The question is whether they'll act on it in, she checked, 3 hours and 46 minutes. A silence. Do they act that fast? HFY asked. This was, I realized, not a tactical question. It was a question about Allied Command's institutional behavior patterns, which was arguably outside her area of expertise. She thought about it. I think, she said, carefully, that when you hand Allied Command a complete communications archive of the enemy's regional coordination structure and tell them they have 4 hours to use it before the window closes, you generally get action. A pause. Bureaucracies move slowly until they don't. This is the kind of thing that makes them not. It was not a certainty. She was not offering certainty. She was offering judgment based on 4 days of solitary observation in a debris field and whatever she knew about the organization she served, and she was offering it plainly. HFY looked at it for a long moment. Transmit, he told the Admiral. The Admiral, who had been quiet throughout, said, transmitting now. 1347 ship time. Package Delta. The full Kothari Communications Archive, burst encrypted to Allied Command, from the middle of the Venori corridor, 49 warships within sensor range. The patience began its exit burn. I am compressing the next several hours. Not because nothing happened, things happen continuously, in the specific way that things happen when you are a single mid-weight signals cruiser making an exit burn through contested space, but because the pacing of those hours was not one of escalation and release. It was one of sustained, cumulative tension, the kind that does not peak and deflate but simply accumulates in the background until the moment it stops. What I will tell you, the COTHRI security review triggered early. Not 9 hours, 6. Something in the access audit flagged faster than a HFY's pattern estimate, and, at 1923 ship time, the patrol density around the relay station increased sharply. Not toward us, they had not yet connected the spinward approach to the extraction. But, the general alert posture across the 49 vessels shifted, and I watched it on my display with the specific quality of attention I reserve for things that are actively relevant to my continued existence. Earlier than I predicted, HFY said, when I told her. She was at the secondary display. She had been there for 3 hours, working, documenting something, additional analysis of the patrol pattern, I assumed, or after-action notes, or possibly both. She had the practiced focus of someone who does their best thinking when there is something external to apply it to. Does it change the timeline? She calculated for a moment. Moves the intercept formation up by about 90 minutes. Call it 0200 now instead of 0347. She checked the exit burn timeline. You'll clear the corridor boundary by 0130. 30 minutes. 30 minutes, she confirmed. If nothing else accelerates. What would accelerate it? If they find the spinward approach in the sensor logs faster than I think. A pause. I moved carefully. I tried to limit the sensor signature. I don't know how well it worked at distance. It worked well enough to get us in during the window. Coming in is easier than leaving a clean trail, she said, which was a distinction I understood professionally and found, in that moment, deeply uncomfortable. I went back to my display. I watched the traffic pattern. I watched the patrol density. I tracked the intercept formation building, slowly, but building, at the far edge of my sensor range. Allied command had been silent since acknowledging the transmission. This was normal. This was the silence of an organization doing things, not of an organization doing nothing. I told myself this at intervals. At 22:11, 3 Allied fleet elements in the sectors adjacent to the corridor began moving. I watched the COTHRI signals. There was a delay, they were reading the same movements I was, processing them, the communication traffic spiking as vessels coordinated, and, then, a pattern shift that I had never seen in 3 cycles of monitoring COTHRI operational behavior. The traffic that normally flowed through the relay station in dense, structured streams fragmented. Routing requests that should have been acknowledged in seconds were going unanswered or returning errors. The cascade was small at first, then, visibly larger, then, the relay station's uplink went dark. Not the cycling protocol. Not the backup window. Dark. In the silence that followed, the COTHRI communication traffic became something I can only describe as the audio equivalent of a structure losing its load-bearing element, not an absence of sound but the sudden, chaotic sound of things trying to fill a gap that cannot be filled. 3 cycles of corridor coordination, collapsing in real time on my display. Vetsan, HFY said, very quietly. I see it, sir. HFY had come to stand beside my console. She was looking at the display, at the fragmenting traffic pattern, at the dark relay station signal, at the Allied fleet elements now pushing into gaps that the COTHRI corridor coordination, 30 seconds ago, had been positioned to close. She did not say anything. I looked at her. She was looking at the display with an expression I had been failing to categorize since she walked onto the bridge, and, which I was now close enough to see in the detail that my species uses to parse emotional state, the chemistry of it, the micro-adjustments of musculature. What I read was not triumph. It was something more complicated and more quiet. It was the expression, I thought, of someone watching the completion of a thing they paid a high price for and cannot yet determine whether the price was right. Her partner had not come back from the Venori corridor. I did not say this. It was not mine to say. But I noted it. I noted it in the log in 2 words, which is all it needed. The unyielding patience cleared the corridor boundary at 0127, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The K3 intercept formation was still 28 minutes behind us, and, the moment we crossed into Allied-held space it dissolved. There was no tactical purpose to a pursuit that had failed, and the K3 corridor vessels had, by that point, significantly more immediate problems than one signals cruiser that had already left. The Allied operation, running on the Archive's intelligence, was inside their coordination structure from 6 different angles simultaneously. They were not chasing us. They were trying to keep the corridor. The Venori Corridor incident, the official name, used only in documents where it must be named, lasted 11 hours and 42 minutes from the first fleet movement to the last exchange of fire. I was not present for the fleet engagement itself. We were 3 sectors clear by then, running a damage assessment that confirmed the patients had, against all probability models I had declined to read, sustained no significant damage. What I was present for was the debrief. Admiral Sorath's debrief of Sergeant Ehejurika lasted 4 hours. I was not in the room. I was at my console, filing signal reports, conducting post-operation analysis, drinking the last of the nutrient suspension with the resigned acceptance of someone who has accepted that it is always going to taste like this. Hatebron came back from the debrief first. He came directly to my console. He stood there for a moment without saying anything, which was, in the months I had been watching him do things, unusual. She went in knowing, he said. Not the partner, she didn't know about that. But, the station. The archive. She went in knowing what it was before the mission briefing confirmed it, because she had pulled the sector signal maps herself and cross-referenced them against the corridor's communication architecture and identified the routing patterns that indicated a central node. She told the mission planners before insertion. They adjusted the mission parameters to include archive extraction. She identified the strategic target before the mission. Before the mission, he said. In her prep work. As he paused, and I watched his fringe search for the correct orientation as a personal initiative. I thought about this. She's a signals analyst, I said. She's listed as a field operative, Hatebron said. Signals analysis is listed as a secondary qualification. I thought about this for slightly longer. Her secondary qualification, I said, identified the relay station's strategic value, which drove the mission design, which produced the archive, which yes, Hatebron said. As prep work, I said. As prep work, he confirmed. I looked at my display. At the Venori corridor, already reconfiguring in the aftermath of the Allied push. At the relay station marker, dark and still. Hatebron, I said. Yes? What was the nutrition bar? He looked at me. His fringe adjusted, the small, fractional movement I had learned to recognize as the precursor to something he was going to say that he had not been planning to say. Mango flavored. Apparently. She said the mango ones are the worst. I filed this in my personal log. I filed it under no particular category. Some things do not require categorization. She left the patients at Waypoint Station 11, where Allied Command had arranged a transfer. 2 officers met her. There was a quiet exchange I could not hear from the corridor, and, then, they walked with her down the station arm toward whatever came next for her debrief, recovery, reassignment, the administrative machinery of an organization that had just been handed a decisive operational advantage and was going to need time to process its gratitude. I was at my station. I was not supposed to be in the docking corridor. I had gone there, I told myself, to confirm the transfer package handoff. She saw me. She walked over. She had the documentation storage unit under her arm. The packages were already copied to Allied Command system, but she was keeping the physical unit, which told me something about how she thought about data. She had the empty EVA suit folded over one shoulder. The cut above her eyebrow had started to fade from the medkit treatment and the bruise on her jaw had gone from red-purple to the yellow-green phase of healing, which in humans indicates the tissue repairing itself, which is something I had read about in the Death World biology files and found, in person, considerably more vivid than the academic description had prepared me for. She looked at me for a moment. You were on the channel when I first came through, she said. The whole time. My station, I said. Signals. You flagged the secondary packet. Yes. She shifted the EVA suit on her shoulder. A small adjustment. She was looking at me with the direct, assessing quality that I had noticed when she first came onto the bridge, a look that does not evaluate you as a problem to solve but as a fact to be accurately understood. "Thank you," she said, "for catching it." I did not have an immediate response to this. The protein brick and the sixth uneventful rotation and the yellow flag on my console at 0314 ship time seemed, in that context, like a very small thing to have done. "Anyone on that shift would have caught it," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Would they?" I thought about the question. I thought about 6 uneventful rotations. About the probability models I had declined to read. About the secondary packet buried in the trailing edge of a signal that registered in the lower third of the detection threshold. "Probably," I said. She smiled, the full version of what I had seen the structural precursor of earlier. It did something to the air in the corridor that I did not have the analytical vocabulary for. "I believe you," she said, in a tone that suggested she was deciding to believe me rather than having been convinced. Then, she walked down the station arm and turned a corner and was gone. I have been writing this log for 11 days now. I am still on the Patience, still at my secondary console, still eating the protein bricks that taste like recycled insulation and drinking the nutrient suspension that has not improved since 0314 of the night this began. The Venori corridor has been reclassified. The Allied operation, driven by the archive, pushed the CA3 coordination structure back 4 sectors in 9 days, the kind of strategic realignment that Allied command had not projected for another 2 cycles. The relay station at 7 Epsilon was destroyed in the 3rd day of the operation. The debris field now has 1 additional wreck in it, smaller than the others. Intelligence Division, as predicted, had a very productive week. Possibly several weeks. The official record says what it says. 38 words on what actually happened. I keep returning to a single fact that I cannot find a place to file. Ehajirika sent the SOS with 9 hours of power remaining. She had the distress beacon available for 4 days. She waited 4 days to use it, not because she was afraid to call for help, but because the mission was not finished. The signal was not, in the end, really a distress call. It was the packaging she used to deliver the intelligence she had spent 4 days gathering, wrapped in a universal emergency format that she knew any Allied vessel in range would be obligated to respond to, with a hidden secondary packet in the trailing edge that only someone paying close attention would find. She sent the SOS because she needed a ship to carry the archive home. The Fleet 1 cruiser, mid-weight, wrong name, was the delivery mechanism. I was the person who caught the packet. I have been thinking about whether she calculated that someone would catch it, or whether she sent it hoping someone would. I have decided I am not going to resolve this. Some things are more useful as open questions. What I know is this: the signal went out into the dark. We heard it. We came. And, somewhere, 3 sectors from where I am sitting, the CA3 Forward Command is trying to understand what happened to their corridor strategy, and how one signal ship with an inaccurate name managed to extract a signal operative from the center of their 49-vessel patrol network without a scratch. They will not find the answer in their sensor logs or their patrol records. The answer was in the secondary packet. They never looked in the trailing edge. I drink the nutrient suspension. I close the log. I leave the last entry for tomorrow, or the next shift, or whenever there is something worth writing. There usually is.